Zira sat by the window staring out at the endless stars. The cold metal walls of the space station were her world now, and the view from her window was the only thing that connected her to the universe beyond. Once, she had been like the others, strong, agile, and full of hope. But now she felt like a prisoner in her own body. The accident had taken everything from her. It had been a simple mission, routine and nothing out of the ordinary. But then the crash happened. A malfunction, an explosion. And when she woke up, she found herself in a world where the ground was no longer something she could stand on. She had lost both her legs and with them her sense of freedom. The doctors told her she would never walk again. At first, Zira had been angry. Angry at the universe, angry at the accident, and most of all, angry at herself. She had once been a warrior, someone who could run across the vast plains of her home planet with ease, feeling the wind in her hair and the strength in her limbs. Now she couldn't even get out of bed without help. But as time passed, her anger turned to sadness. The isolation was the hardest part. In the quiet of her room, she couldn't escape her thoughts. The silence was deafening, and the weight of her loneliness pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. She missed the feeling of the wind on her face, of running with her people, of having a purpose. Zira had always been proud of who she was, proud of her strength, proud of her ability to protect her people. But now, that pride felt hollow. What was she now? She was no longer the warrior who could fight alongside her comrades. She was just a woman with no legs, trapped in a chair, watching life pass her by. The station had become her prison. She spent most of her days in her small room reading old books, looking out the window and thinking about the life she used to have. She wondered if she would ever feel whole again, if she would ever feel the ground beneath her feet, if she would ever be free. But one day, something changed. It started with a knock on her door. Zira didn't expect anyone. The people on the station were busy with their own lives, and she had long ago stopped expecting visits. But when the door opened, she was surprised to see a man standing there, someone she had never met before. He was human, tall, with dark hair and a friendly smile. He wore the uniform of an engineer, the same as the others on the station. But there was something different about him, something that made Zira feel a little less alone, even if just for a moment. "Hello," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "I'm David. I've been assigned to work here for the next few months. I thought I'd come by and introduce myself." Zira stared at him for a moment, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to being around strangers, especially not humans. But there was something about David that made her feel less like an outsider. He didn't look at her with pity, as most people did. Instead, his eyes were filled with curiosity and kindness. "I'm Zira," she said, her voice soft. "I don't get many visitors." David nodded, stepping into the room and glancing around. "I can imagine. It must be pretty quiet here." Zira didn't respond. She didn't know how to explain the loneliness that had become her constant companion. She didn't know how to tell him that she was slowly losing hope, piece by piece. David took a step closer, his gaze resting on her legs. She saw the hesitation in his eyes, but he didn't mention them. Instead, he smiled and sat down across from her. "I'm here for the next few months," he said, "so I thought I'd offer to help out with anything you might need. I know it can get a bit lonely here, and I don't mind keeping you company from time to time." Zira was taken aback. Most people on the station treated her with distance, not wanting to make her feel uncomfortable. But David was different. He didn't see her as broken, as someone who needed fixing. He saw her as a person with feelings and needs. "I appreciate the offer," Zira said, though she didn't know what to make of it. She had spent so long shutting herself off from others, keeping her distance, that she wasn't sure how to interact anymore. David seemed to sense her hesitation. "I don't want to intrude," he said, "but if you ever need anything, even just someone to talk to, I'm here." Zira nodded slowly, still unsure. But there was something in his eyes, a warmth, a kindness that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Over the next few weeks, David kept his promise. He stopped by occasionally to check in, bringing her news from the rest of the station or just sitting with her in silence. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Zira feel like she wasn't completely alone in the universe. One evening, as the sun began to set outside, David asked if he could help with anything. Zira had grown used to his visits, and this time, she found herself nodding. "There is one thing," she said quietly. "I've been trying to repair a piece of equipment. It's a bit of a challenge, but I think I can do it." David raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'd be happy to help, if you want," Zira hesitated. She wasn't used to asking for help, but something about David made her feel like it was okay to let her guard down. "Maybe just a little help," she said. "But only if you don't mind getting your hands dirty." David smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I've worked on ships all my life. Getting dirty is part of the job." As they worked together, Zira felt a small spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think that maybe, just maybe, her life could change. David didn't offer her false promises. He didn't try to fix her. He simply gave her something she hadn't realized she needed: his company, his kindness, and the possibility that there was more to life than the limitations she had placed on herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she needed. The days grew longer, but Zira found herself looking forward to David's visits. It wasn't just the company, though. That was a welcome change from the isolation she had grown accustomed to. It was the way he didn't treat her like she was, broken. He never pitied her, never made her feel less than who she was. Instead, he saw her as someone worth getting to know, someone with strength despite her circumstances. David came by the space station's workshop almost every day to check on the equipment, but he often found an excuse to drop by Zira's room afterward. He would bring her small gifts: an old book, a simple plant for her windowsill, or a piece of strange technology he had repaired. Each gesture, no matter how small, made Zira feel something she hadn't in years: cared for. Zira hadn't realized how much she missed human connection until David came into her life. At first, she was hesitant to speak much about her past. She didn't want to burden him with her pain or her brokenness, but little by little she began to share bits and pieces of her life. David listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. He only nodded and asked thoughtful questions, making her feel heard in a way she hadn't experienced in ages. One day, David arrived with something she didn't expect: a piece of technology that looked like an armature for prosthetic legs. "I've been working on something," David said, his voice casual but with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "I know you've been struggling with the idea of walking again, but I think this could help." Zira stared at the device in disbelief. It wasn't just a simple repair. It was something that could change her life. "I've done a lot of research on prosthetics," David explained, "and I think I can help you walk again. It's a long process and it won't be easy, but it could work." Zira felt a mixture of emotions flood through her. She was terrified. Terrified that this was just another false hope. Terrified that it wouldn't work, that she would fail once again. But at the same time, a small spark of hope flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the breakthrough she needed. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you care so much? I'm not your responsibility." David smiled softly, sitting down beside her. "I care because you matter," he said simply. "I know what it feels like to lose something important, to feel like there's no way back. But that's not the end of the story. You've already shown me how strong you are. I think you can do this." Zira's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe what he was saying. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Not with such belief, not with such confidence. She wanted to pull away, to shut him out, but she couldn't. Something inside her wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that her life wasn't over, that there was still something worth fighting for. "I'll give it a try," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't promise I'll succeed." David nodded. "That's all I ask. You don't have to promise anything. We'll take it one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, David worked tirelessly on the prosthetics. He spent hours adjusting the mechanical legs, ensuring they would fit perfectly and function properly. Zira watched from the sidelines, her doubts creeping in, but her heart filled with a glimmer of hope. The day David finally finished the legs, he came to her room with a big grin on his face. "It's ready," he said, holding out the prosthetic legs. "I've made a few adjustments since the last time we talked. These should fit you perfectly." Zira sat in her chair, her hands trembling. She stared at the legs for a long moment. Could she really do this? Could she really walk again? David helped her into position, gently guiding her legs into place. The weight of the prosthetics was heavier than she had imagined, but they felt strangely comforting, like they were giving her a second chance at life. "It might take a while to get used to them," David warned, his voice steady. "But don't rush, we'll take it slow." Zira nodded, her breathing shallow. She had always been proud of her strength, but now for the first time in a long time she felt vulnerable. It wasn't just the physical challenge she was facing. It was the emotional one too. To trust someone enough to let them help her after so many years of self-reliance, it was terrifying. David helped her to her feet, his hands steady and reassuring. Zira's knees wobbled slightly, but she managed to stand. The weight of the prosthetics was strange but not unbearable. She took a cautious step forward, then another. The first few steps were shaky, unsure, but with each one, she grew a little, more confident. She could feel her body adjusting, her muscles remembering what it felt like to walk. It was hard. It was painful at times. But Zira didn't give up. She couldn't. With David's patient encouragement, she slowly took more steps, one after the other. "Good job," David said, his voice full of pride. "You're doing it, Zira. You're walking again." The tears came then, tears of frustration, tears of joy. Zira couldn't stop them. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. She felt the ground beneath her feet, the way she had longed for. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Zira believed that maybe, just maybe, her life could be more than what it had become. David didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. His presence, his belief in her was enough. He had given her a chance to start again, a chance to reclaim her life, and that was something Zira would never forget. As she took her first few steps, Zira realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who cared, someone who believed in her, someone who would help her take those steps, no matter how hard they were. And that was a gift she never expected, but was grateful for every single day. Days turned into weeks, and Zira's life began to change. The prosthetic legs, though still a challenge, were becoming less of an obstacle with each passing day. She was walking, even if it was slowly and with some pain. The journey was difficult, but each step she took felt like a victory. With David by her side, encouraging her every time she wavered, Zira found the strength to keep moving forward. David had been nothing short of patient. Every day he would visit her, making sure she had everything she needed. Sometimes he would just sit with her, talking about his day, or he would bring her little things to brighten her mood. Zira had never known someone who cared for her so selflessly. His kindness was a balm for her soul, and slowly, she started to realize that she wasn't just walking again, she was living again. But even though Zira was walking, there were still obstacles ahead. The prosthetics felt strange on her body, and every step required more effort than she had expected. Her legs ached constantly, and her balance was still shaky. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she wanted to give up. The pain, the exhaustion, and the frustration made her question whether it was all worth it. One afternoon, after several unsuccessful attempts to walk further than she had before, Zira collapsed onto the couch, her legs burning with fatigue. Her hands shook as she tried to rub the soreness from her muscles. "I can't do this," she muttered to herself, her voice filled with frustration. She had come so far, but in this moment, it felt like the mountain was too high to climb. David was there almost immediately, kneeling in front of her. "Hey," he said gently. "You're doing great. You've made more progress than anyone could have expected." Zira shook her head, her face tight with frustration. "It's not enough. I'm not enough. Every day I try, but I still feel broken." David remained silent for a moment, just looking at her, his expression soft. He understood what she was feeling. He had seen the strength in her every time she pushed through the pain. But he also knew that healing wasn't just physical. It was emotional too. "You're not broken, Zira," David said softly, his voice steady. "You've been through so much, and yet you're still here, still fighting. That makes you stronger than most people I know." Zira met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for the truth in his words. She didn't want to believe him, didn't want to admit that she could still be strong, but his unwavering confidence in her made something stir within her. It was a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that she had buried deep inside herself for so long. "I don't know if I can keep going," she whispered, her voice faltering. "I don't know if I have it in me." David reached out, gently placing a hand on hers. "You don't have to do this alone, Zira. I'm right here with you, and you're stronger than you think. Every time you take a step, it's a victory. You don't need to rush. Just take it one step at a time." Zira closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The words didn't magically erase the pain or make the journey easier, but they did give her something important. Hope. Maybe she wasn't broken. Maybe she could find her way back, one step at a time. The next few days were tough. Zira had good days and bad days, some where she felt like she was making progress, and others when the pain and frustration almost overwhelmed her. But each time she stumbled, David was there, steady and patient. He never pushed her too hard. Instead, he encouraged her to take things slow and to listen to her body. One afternoon, David surprised her with a new challenge. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "How about we try something different today?" Zira raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "Different? What do you mean?" David grinned. "Let's go outside. I've got an idea that might help you gain more confidence with your legs." Zira hesitated. The thought of stepping outside, of being in the open air again, was both exciting and terrifying. What if she couldn't do it? What if the prosthetics weren't enough to carry her? But David's enthusiasm was contagious, and something inside her pushed her to take a leap of faith. "Okay," she said slowly, her heart racing. "Let's give it a try." David led her to the space station's small outdoor area, a platform surrounded by the vastness of space. The view was breathtaking, with stars stretching out as far as the eye could see. Zira had always loved the view from the station, but today it felt different. Today it felt like a new beginning. David handed her a walking stick, not to support her, but to help her find her balance. "We're going to start slow," he said. "I want you to feel the ground beneath your feet. No rush. Just take your time." Zira nodded, gripping the walking stick in her hands. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The world felt so big, so wide, and for a moment, she felt small. But then she remembered David's words. One step at a time. She took her first step onto the platform. Her legs felt heavy, awkward, but she pushed through the discomfort, focusing on each movement. With each step, the ground beneath her felt more stable. The fresh air filled her lungs, and she felt a sense of freedom that she hadn't felt in so long. David walked beside her, just close enough to offer support, but not hovering. "You're doing great," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. Zira smiled, a small but genuine smile. She could feel the strength returning to her body, not just in her legs, but in her heart. With each step, she grew more confident, more hopeful. She was moving forward. Not just physically, but emotionally as well. When they reached the far side of the platform, Zira stopped, Looking out at the stars, she felt a surge of pride. "I did it," she whispered, barely believing the words. David stood beside her, looking at the stars as well. "You sure did, and I'm proud of you." For the first time in a long time, Zira believed him. As the days passed, Zira's progress with her new legs continued to amaze her. Each day she took more steps, walked a little farther, and grew more confident in her abilities. But what surprised her most was the bond that was forming between her and David. What had started as simple companionship had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them had expected. It was an ordinary morning when the change became undeniable. Zira had just finished her daily exercises when David walked into her room, holding a cup of warm tea. He smiled at her, his eyes bright with an energy she had come to depend on. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, setting the tea down beside her. Zira glanced up at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Better," she said, taking the tea and breathing in the warmth. "It's getting easier every day." David nodded, pleased with her progress. "You're amazing. You've come so far." Zira looked at him for a long moment, her heart unexpectedly racing. She had always been drawn to David, but lately, something had changed. The way he looked at her, the way he made her feel, more than just capable but valued, was something she hadn't experienced before. It was more than just friendship, and she realized with a sudden clarity that it had been for a long time. David noticed her gaze and paused, his smile softening. "Zira, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. She put the tea down and turned her full attention to him. "What is it?" David took a deep breath as though gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you, about me, about us." He seemed nervous, his usual confidence wavering. "I never expected any of this. When I first came here, I just wanted to help. But then, I got to know you. And I realized that you're someone special. Not because of the prosthetics, not because of what happened to you, but because of who you are." Zira's breath caught in her chest. She felt a strange flutter in her stomach. "David," she whispered, unsure of where this conversation was heading. He took a small step closer, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I care about you, Zira, more than I ever expected. And I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air, almost too much for Zira to process. She had never imagined that someone like David, someone so kind and gentle, would feel that way about her. She had spent so many years thinking of herself as broken, as unworthy of love. But in that moment she realized how wrong she had been. I don't know what to say," Zira stammered, her mind racing. I never thought I could feel this way again." David smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to say anything right now, Zira. I just wanted you to know how I feel. No pressure. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you matter to me." Zira felt a wave of warmth wash over her. Her heart, which had been so closed off for so long, was beginning to open. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable, to trust someone like this. But in David's presence she felt safe. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could believe in love again. "I care about you too, David," she finally said, her voice soft but sure. "More than I've let myself admit." David's smile grew wider, and without thinking, he took her hand in his. Zira didn't pull away. She didn't want to. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently, feeling a connection that was more than physical, more than just two people sharing a space. It was something deeper, something that could change everything. Over the following weeks, their relationship continued to grow. David was always there for her, whether it was helping her walk, bringing her meals, or simply sitting with her in silence. Zira had never imagined that someone could care for her so much, that someone could see beyond her brokenness and love her for who she was. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle outside the space station's windows, David took Zira's hand again. They were sitting on the small balcony, the quiet hum of the station filling the background. "I've been thinking," David said softly, "about the future. About what comes next for us." Zira looked at him, curious but nervous. "What do you mean?" David's eyes shone in the soft light. "I've seen how strong you are, Zira, and I think you've been holding back. You've been afraid to dream again, but I believe you're ready to take that next step, not just with your legs, but with everything else." Zira frowned slightly. "What kind of step?" David's gaze softened, and his voice dropped to a tender whisper. "What if we built a future together? What if we started a family?" Zira's heart skipped a beat. The idea seemed impossible at first. Could she really have a family? Could someone like her, someone who had been through so much, ever have the life she had always wanted? But as David's hand brushed against hers, Zira realized that the idea wasn't so far-fetched after all. He believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, she could believe in herself too. "I've never thought about it," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe it's time to start dreaming again." David smiled at her, his eyes full of hope. "I think we're both ready for something new, something more." And in that moment, Zira felt the weight of the past lift off her shoulders, replaced by the warmth of the future, a future she would build with David, step by step. As the days passed, Zira began to believe that she could have everything she had ever wanted. With David by her side, she no longer saw herself as broken. She saw herself as someone capable of love, capable of joy, capable of a future full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Zira felt truly alive. As Zira and David's relationship deepened, they began to feel like they were building something special, something that no one could take away from them. But despite the happiness they found in each other's company, they knew the world around them wasn't always so understanding. Their bond, an alien woman and a human, was not something everyone would accept. It started slowly, with whispers in the hallways. A glance here, a raised eyebrow there. Zira had always known that her people, the aliens who lived on the space station, were proud and rigid in their traditions. They valued physical strength, pride, and duty above all else. Zira's accident had already made her feel like an outsider, but now her growing connection with David made her feel even more out of place. She wasn't sure if it was because she was walking again or because of her growing affection for the human, but the judgment was becoming harder to ignore. David noticed it too. He had never been one to care what others thought, but the stares, the murmurs, they began to weigh on him. He wasn't used to being looked at as though he didn't belong. He was an outsider, yes, but his heart ached every time he saw Zira's face fall when someone looked at her with disdain. One evening, after a long day of work, David found Zira sitting alone in the small garden of the station, her legs stretched out in front of her as she gazed at the stars. He sat down beside her, a soft smile on his face as he handed her a cup of tea. "They're staring again," Zira said quietly, not looking at him. Her voice was a mixture of sadness and resignation. "I can feel their eyes. I don't know if I can handle it anymore." David took a deep breath sitting beside her. "I know. It's hard. I see it too. But Zira, you are stronger than they will ever know. You've been through so much and you've come so far. None of that matters. What matters is what we have." Zira nodded, but remained silent. The truth was, she wasn't sure if what they had was enough to face the world's judgment. She had spent so much of her life trying to be strong, trying to prove her worth. But now, as she sat beside David, she realized that the world's opinion didn't matter as much as it once had. The people around her, the ones who didn't understand her relationship with David, were still in the shadows of her past. What mattered was her future, and David was a part of that future. The next day, they encountered the first real challenge to their relationship. Zira had just finished her exercises when one of her fellow aliens, a woman named Lyra, stopped by to visit. Lyra had been one of the people Zira had trusted before her accident, someone who had shared many of her hopes and dreams. But now Zira noticed a coldness in her eyes. "David," Lyra said, her voice crisp, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Zira," she turned to face the alien woman, her eyes sharp. "I see you've found someone. A human." Zira's heart sank. The judgment was already there, thick in the air between them. She could feel Lyra's disapproval, as though it was a tangible force pressing down on her. "Yes," Zira said, lifting her chin, trying to stand tall despite the weight of the situation. "David is here with me, and I care about him." Lyra shook her head, a sad smile playing on her lips. "You're making a mistake, Zira. You were always the one who understood the importance of our traditions. Humans can't be trusted. They're weak. They're not our people." David stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Zira is not weak, and neither am I. We care about each other, and that's all that matters." The tension in the air was thick. Lyra's eyes flicked between David and Zira, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're not one of us anymore, Zira. You've changed, and I'm afraid you've made a terrible choice." Zira felt her heart shatter at Lyra's words. This was someone she had considered a friend, someone she had shared her dreams with. Now those dreams felt shattered too, but as she looked over at David standing by her side, she felt something stronger than the sting of Lyra's words. She felt determination. "You're wrong, Lyra," Zira said, her voice unwavering. "I haven't changed. I'm still the same. Zira, I've always been. And David is a part of my life now, no matter what anyone thinks. You don't have to understand it, but you will respect it." There was silence for a long moment. Lyra seemed to weigh Zira's words carefully before she let out a quiet sigh. "I'll never understand it," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But if you're happy, I won't stop you. Just don't forget who you are." And with that, Lyra turned and left, leaving Zira and David standing alone, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. David stepped closer to Zira, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You did great," he said softly. "You stood up for what matters." Zira nodded, but a part of her still hurt. Lyra's words had cut deeper than she had expected. She had hoped that her people, the ones who knew her best, would understand. But in the end, Zira realized something important. She couldn't live her life according to the expectations of others. She had to live for herself, for what made her happy. And right now, what made her happy was David. Over the next few days, things didn't get easier. Zira and David faced more judgment, more whispers behind their backs. But with each passing day, they grew stronger, their bond unshakable. They continued to walk through the stares, the whispers, and the harsh words. Because in the end, the love they shared was more than enough to face anything that came their way. Zira knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more prejudices to face. But as long as she had David by her side, she knew she could overcome them. They had already made it through so much, and together they would continue to face whatever came next. The weeks that followed were a mixture of challenges and triumphs. Zira and David had learned to stand strong in the face of judgment and prejudice, but it wasn't always easy. Each day, as they navigated the world around them, they encountered reminders that their love was still viewed as something unusual, something that others couldn't fully accept. Yet, as time passed, Zira began to realize that the harsh words and disapproving looks didn't matter as much as they once had. She had come so far in her own healing, both physically and emotionally. With David by her side, she had found a new sense of purpose, a new reason to live. And the love they shared, though still misunderstood by some, was more than enough to fill her heart. One evening, after a particularly hard day, David walked into their small apartment on the space station. Zira was sitting by the window, gazing out at the endless stars, her thoughts distant. She had made great progress with her walking, but the emotional toll of facing judgment and disapproval still weighed heavily on her. David sat down next to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "How are you doing?" Zira sighed, leaning into his touch. I'm okay. It's just, some days feel harder than others. I still hear the whispers, feel the stares. David squeezed her shoulder gently. I know, it's hard. But look how far you've come, Zira. You've been through so much and you're still standing strong. You're not alone in this, we're in this together. Zira turned to look at him, her eyes filled with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you, David. I was so lost before you came into my life. But now I feel like there's hope again. David smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. You've always had hope, Zira. You just needed someone to remind you of it. I'm glad I could be that person. As Zira looked at him, she realized that David had become her anchor in a world that often felt unpredictable and cruel. He had given her not just the strength to walk again, but the courage to face a future full of possibilities. She had once thought she would never be able to trust anyone again, never be able to love. But with David, all of that had changed. The next few weeks brought something unexpected. Zira discovered she was pregnant. The news was both a shock and a joy. At first, she had been scared. How could she, with her prosthetics, be a mother? Could she really raise a child? But David's joy and support were more than enough to reassure her. He made her believe, for the first time, that they could build a family together. David took every opportunity to show Zira how much he loved her and how excited he was to become a father. He read books about parenting, asked her about her dreams for their child, and promised to be there every step of the way. Zira, too, began to imagine the future she had once thought was impossible. A future filled with laughter, love, and a child to care for. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony watching the stars, David spoke quietly, his voice filled with wonder. Can you imagine it, Zira? A little one running around, laughing, playing. Our family. Zira smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. It's hard to imagine, but I want to. I want to believe that we can have everything we've dreamed of. David nodded, his expression serious now. I know the world hasn't always been kind to us. I know it hasn't been easy. But what we have is real, and we're going to make it work. We're going to build the life we want, together. Zira's heart swelled with love for him. Together, she repeated softly, the word carrying a weight of meaning she hadn't realized before. As the days passed, Zira continued to grow stronger. Her body had adapted to the prosthetics in ways she hadn't imagined possible. She was walking farther every day, her movements more confident and fluid. But it wasn't just the physical healing that mattered anymore. It was the emotional healing too. She was no longer the woman who had lost everything. She was someone who had found a new life, a new purpose, and someone to share it with. The news of her pregnancy spread quickly through the space station, and while there were still some disapproving looks, the overall reaction was surprisingly supportive. People who had once looked at her with pity now looked at her with admiration. Zira had become a symbol of strength, of hope. She had overcome so much, and now she was bringing new life into the world. David and Zira spent their evenings making plans for their future. They chose a small, quiet spot near the space station where they could raise their child in peace, away from the chaos and judgment. They dreamed of a simple life, one where they could build their own little family, away from the expectations of others. One evening, as they were sitting together, David took Zira's hand in his. I can't wait for our little one to arrive, he said with a smile. We're going to make an amazing team, Zira. You, me, and our baby. Zira smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. I never thought this was possible, she whispered. But now, with you by my side, I know it is. David kissed her forehead gently. Together, we can do anything. As the days turned into months, Zira's confidence continued to grow. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. She had found a new sense of strength in herself, in David, and in the future they were building together. When the day finally came for their baby to be born, Zira felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't alone. She had a family now, and with David by her side, she knew they could face anything. Their daughter was born healthy and strong, and when Zira held her for the first time, she couldn't help but marvel at the miracle she had created. A new life, a new beginning, full of endless possibilities. And as Zira looked at her daughter, she realized something important. Her story wasn't over. It had only just begun.